Hello, folks. Another episode of Burning Platform. Real honor to have John Wookey today. I've been trying to get him on the show for probably as long as the show's been on, 3 years. John has had an amazing career in enterprise software. Everything from Andersen, Accenture, to Oracle, to SAP, to Salesforce. I don't think there's a company he hasn't touched. John, thank you so much for joining me. Brag about yourself for a couple of minutes.
Well, thanks for having me, Vinnie. Really pleased to be here. I think I've been incredibly fortunate. I came out of Berkeley, having done a master's program in what was at the time called engineering sciences or operations research. And there was a partner in the San Francisco office of Accenture, but at the time was still called Arthur Andersen's Management Information Consulting Division. And he literally tried to pluck every person out of this program because he'd found that there was something about the way our brains were folded that we tend to be pretty good folks when it came to computer science things. So I started my career at Accenture, which was just a great place to learn and to grow and to try a lot of different things. Went to work for one of their customers for a couple of years. Ended up at a company called Ross Systems, which goes back to the days of host terminal computing, proprietary systems before Unix. And then that company kind of moved from the Bay Area out to Atlanta, and I joined Oracle in the applications division, which was still, it was a good business, even then, but obviously much smaller than it is today, and much smaller than the tech business was for Oracle, especially the database. And I think I was fortunate because there I had an opportunity to work as part of a great team and to spend at least some time with Larry Ellison, who taught me a number of lessons, especially around product and technology and how you think through decisions. Then had a chance to work with with Mark Benioff at Salesforce, and really saw the sort of jump from client server and on-premise systems to the cloud. And then did a couple of tours of duty at SAP, where I got to work with some great folks there, really see what global enterprise software is like. And through that, I was fortunate. I had jobs where I was running huge organizations, like at Oracle after we bought PeopleSoft and Siebel, and I was running the applications division there, which was a pretty big group. And then I've done a couple things where I effectively was doing startups inside of big companies. And so I was fortunate that I had both the big company experience and then within the big company had some more startup like experiences, and worked with just amazing people and leaders along the way. As I mentioned, Larry Ellison, Mark Benioff, got a couple of times to interact with Hasso Plattner and Jim Schnaba, who was my boss at SAP, who was just a terrific guy to work for. Keith Block at Salesforce as well. So I've worked with some just tremendous individuals, and it's really helped me sort of grow and develop and become I think a better rounded sort of leader within this industry.
When you're talking about enterprise software royalty right there, that you worked with, that's fantastic. Now, you've been away from SAP your last tour for 18 months. Tell us what
Yeah.
you've been doing. What have you been doing? You're not a person who just sits around doing nothing. So share, if you can, what you've been doing.
I've done a little bit of the sitting around doing nothing. It's very enjoyable, I have to tell you. My joke is, we live in a digital world, and when I'm not working in the digital world, I like to spend a lot of time doing analog things, building, sheds and, very basic things where you work with your hands and you move around a lot as opposed to sit on a Zoom call all day. But I have done some other things as well. I've been doing some consulting for folks, and as much as having been at Salesforce for a long time, you come to the belief that the world has all moved to cloud. It turns out a lot of the world is still making that change, especially in a lot of the industry specific application areas. So I've been doing some consulting for folks to help them make the transition to the cloud, because as it's generally approached as a technical project, and frankly it's as big a cultural project as it is anything else, and trying to think differently about the business and the way you work with your customers and the way you think about the marketplace. And then I've done some amount of consulting around helping companies think about industries, which I know is a big topic for you. But industries is still something where people, tend to be reticent, right? They have success with a product, it tends to be in a specific area. And as they think about trying to grow their market, industries is a logical thing for them to think about, but there's a lot of reluctance. And so companies, since I had an opportunity to develop industry applications at Oracle and started the industry group at Salesforce, and of course, having been at SAP, they really do think in industries. I've been able to take some of my experience and help companies that are just starting to make that journey think about the way they want to do that.
Let's come back to industries a little more. But you mentioned a couple of years ago, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, you said, Vinnie, the next generation of enterprise apps is going to be very data centric. We'll let the data do a lot of things for us rather than having humans type that into the system and so on. And it's almost like you were prophetic, because suddenly now we've gotten interested in generative AI, which depends on a lot of enterprise data. So tell me if this is what you were thinking, or how has it shaped up in the last 3 or 4 years?
Yeah, that was a lot of it. I had this, view that, when you think about the progression of industry application or applications in general, we started with host terminal computing. I always say my first job at Accenture was actually, we were building a system for a construction company. We were literally moving them from paper forms to, their first computers. And we took the paper forms and the processes that they used manually, and we just automated them. We literally, I took an invoice form and I made a green screen version of it in character mode. That was the design. And, all of the, we've seen obviously go from, host terminal on-premise systems to client server to cloud. And now you see the emergence of AI-based systems. And each of those transitions tend to come in sort of 2 steps. So there's a step one of you sort of take the new technology, you migrate the old technology to it. You don't change it a lot. You might take advantage of a couple of things, but you typically don't rethink the problem. And then oftentimes new players come into the market and they reimagine what it can be. And, Salesforce did that with cloud computing. I think a lot, PeopleSoft to a certain extent did that with client server. They really they didn't have a legacy business to protect. They didn't have legacy, architecture, technology that they were still investing in. And it gave them the opportunity to step back and rethink the problem. And when I think about the emergence of AI-based systems, all of which is completely dependent on the fact that, the web exists. Every computer theoretically is connected to every other computer. You can think of the world as being one logical computer. I know there's a lot of very real barriers to that being true, but you could think about it in the abstract that way. But all this data now exists. And in some ways, we have to rethink the problem and the way we're trying to fix the problem, and not think about these applications as primarily data gathering systems, and start thinking of them as applications that leverage that data to help people meet specific objectives. And that's what I think the transition needs to become. I think a lot of the AI technology I see in the application space is good technology. It's incremental improvements on the current systems, but people aren't really necessarily stepping back and going back to what they, as you say, going back to first principles and saying, well, what is the business problem? If we didn't have any application at all today, what would we build now? Based on systems in which the data is available, we should understand what our customers' business problems are, and we should build applications that mostly are about giving them the best possible course of action to reach those business objectives.
I think I worry that we in the enterprise world, not in the consumer world, in the enterprise world, we are delusional that we have a lot of data. I mean, if you look at Oracle, for example, much of the data is in proprietary data centers. Yeah, they don't own much in the cloud, right? Maybe in HR and their Fusion data. If you look at other companies, even though Salesforce or Workday that have quite a bit of data in the cloud, I don't know if they have permissions to use their data to train their machines, right? So I worry that the enterprise software area actually is going to take a long time before AI truly can deliver meaningful results. Am I being too cynical?
No, I think you're right. I think there are all, and the rise of nations raising issues around data privacy and data residency has made people, even more nervous about it. There was one of the best examples I've seen of a enterprise application using data is the Concur application, the travel and expense application that SAP owns. When Concur is run by very smart people from very early on, a very well-run business. And one thing they did that was very smart is when they signed customer contracts, it included the ability to access the data. And so they've been able to use that data to improve the quality of the application in things like fraud detection. So fraud detection used to be a service that was done manually, 10 years ago. And today it's something that can really be done almost completely through artificial intelligence. And it's incredibly good because they have access to the breadth of data, and every customer's data obviously makes the data that much stronger for everybody else. So they had the foresight early on to think about that. And I think that's one thing companies are going to have to start doing, is understanding that there's a lot of value in that data, especially when it's joined to other companies, especially in the same industry they're in. So, getting access to that data is going to be an important part of it. I think Salesforce is interesting because they obviously are in a situation where they have incredible data around their customers, and there's all kinds of capabilities they can create now around whether it's Salesforce automation or service or marketing, leveraging that data. But part of it then begins with what you brought up, which is making sure the customers are comfortable with how they're going to use it and that they give them rights to be able to do that.
So how long will it take to resolve that?
Well, I think you have to start. I mean, I think it takes as long as it does for them to present a use case to their customers that they're excited enough about, that they say this is worth it, and they prove to them that that data, while shared, isn't something that ever can be exposed to their competitors or to other companies they don't want to be exposed to. I mean, the ability to anonymize the data and therefore protect it, I think is technology and processes people understand. I think it's just a matter of convincing the customers that, again, the use case is worth, what should be really no risk to them, and actually, sharing that data in a way that allows Salesforce or other companies to basically use that data in a way that helps them build a better application for them.
Let's go back to verticals. One of the things I'm not seeing enough in the Gen AI conversation is operational data, right? I'm seeing a lot of use cases around document-based legal stuff, HR stuff, even customer-facing FAQs, bots, making bots more sophisticated with a lot more data available.
Yeah.
I'm not seeing enough in operational areas. And so that's another incentive for vendors to say, I need to verticalize, because if I verticalize, that's one way to harness data and use it. So go back to your point. Vendors tend to be very cautious about verticalizing. It's almost like it's somebody else's job, or I'll buy somebody when somebody becomes big enough in a certain area. Explain the psyche. You've been in the industry for so long. Explain the psyche.
So I think there's a couple dimensions to it. First, I'll start by making an argument that I think everybody verticalizes whether they think they're verticalizing or not. And I'm going to use Salesforce as an example. So Salesforce, when they first released their products, they weren't verticalized. But if you look at that application, especially the first few years, it was largely built around the business processes of the high-tech industry. So at some point, I remember looking at customer data we had, and we had like 90x% of the high-tech industry were running Salesforce. It was like, it was built perfectly for it. And why was that? Well, Salesforce was a bunch of people out of the high-tech industry. We just, by default, understood that industry. So when we thought about a sales process, that's what we thought about. So in a way, when you build an application, there's always some framework you have for a customer. And usually it's a customer you understand in some industry that you're either in or that you understand and have worked with before. So I would actually argue as a beginning point that everybody, whether they think they're doing it or not, has some kind of verticalization they put into the product almost by default, almost unconsciously. I think the reason why people don't then become more aggressive with it is they actually feel it limits themselves. By saying we're going after financial services, then they're by default not going after healthcare. They're not going after retail. They're not. So I almost feel like they feel like if we say we're going after this industry, then there's all these other industries people assume we're not in. So in a way, I think they feel like by declaring that, they actually are in some ways limiting themselves in other markets. So I think that's part of the psyche. The second, I think, is this concern that that the expectations of customers of those industries will grow. Well, if you support financial services, why aren't you doing this and this and this, right? There's all these capabilities that people feel they're going to come short on. But you have to take that step, and I think you have to do it for a couple of reasons. One is, I think your relevancy to customers in those industries grows tremendously when you declare and you make that investment. Second, I think the even more important reason is, in order to build especially new types of products based on artificial intelligence and leveraging the data, you will not do that well if you don't have a deeper understanding of customers in those industries. So, one of the thing I would argue is that in the evolution of our industry from, host terminal, proprietary systems, on-premise, client server, web, cloud, now AI, each of those progressions, in order to really build applications that are meaningful to our customers, our understanding of their businesses have had to get deeper. Like it's because partly it's not a function anymore of going to the customer and saying, tell us what you need. It's a function of going to the customer and saying, tell us how your business works. How is it changing? What are your competitive issues? What are your opportunities? You need to understand their business very deeply and then apply your understanding of technology to solve the applications. Artificial intelligence, and especially the speed that we started moving at with cloud computing and building artificial intelligence systems that basically should be anticipating the kind of information people need to be at their business objectives, you have to really understand their business in a really meaningful way. So I think that's one of the reasons people have to verticalize, because you can't understand a company's business if you don't understand the industry that they're working in.
And I think, two other points, John. One is I helped SAP, Peter Meyer and Thomas Saraswat write a book last year called Business as Unusual. And it looked at how COVID, Ukraine crisis, climate change urgency, and digital transformations at companies have basically allowed us to imagine applications that we couldn't 4 or 5 years ago. Everything from telemedicine to EV battery management and charging, billing, right? EV, that's become a major market. Didn't exist 4 years ago. But things like intelligent returns for e-commerce. You don't want associates making a decision, should I refurbish, restock, all that, right? That should be all, and the reverse logistics that go with it. So we're tracking about 100 edge applications that are industry specific that you cannot build unless you have a deep understanding of those processes. And the other thing, I think it takes a strong leader, right? So Salesforce has Jujhar Singh, who has, I think, done a great job in the last 3 or 4 years, verticalizing a number of the applications. Same thing with Peter Meyer at SAP. So I think it takes somebody who's willing to take the arrows. And everybody will be firing at that poor person saying, why are you verticalizing? It's too risky, it's too whatever. all the old objections for verticalizing, they have to be prepared to do that. But hopefully more of them will stand up.
Well, I think I agree. I think that those are both very strong leaders in industry applications of those companies. I think in Jujhar's case, you also have Dave Schmeier on the other side running the core product group.
Absolutely.
Who also understands verticalization, right? Siebel is very strong in that from the early days. So that was a big part of his strategy. So I think you get the benefit of, the person running the overall product organization understanding that. And I think part of the challenge with verticalization is not binary. I think it's a question of which verticals and how deep you go. So, especially in the case of Salesforce, which has a tremendous partner ecosystem, there's always a question of what does Salesforce build and what do they leave for partners to build?
Sure.
Because if you look at most of the partners in the ecosystem, they're tightly hovered around, not just the platform technology, but very tightly hovered around their most successful applications, right? You want to be tied to SFA at Salesforce because they have a lot of customers. And if you're a ecosystem partner, you want to sell into the biggest customer base possible. So part of the verticalization decision, I'm sure that David and Jujhar go through all the time, is what is Salesforce's job and what do we leave for the ecosystem? Because you want to make sure you have a robust ecosystem that allows you to sort of, gives customers more choices in that last mile of capabilities and doesn't force Salesforce to have to do everything and become an expert in everything.
That's a great point. The other thing that I find vendors, especially Western vendors, seem reluctant to do is localize, right? I mean, we've been developing applications for 50 years, backend applications for 50 years. And if you look at the 200 countries around the world, most vendors don't have more than 10% coverage, right? And so I think we're at a cusp where I was in India for a month earlier this year. And what was fascinating was not just the energy in India, obviously becoming a major market unto itself, but they're trading a lot more with the Middle East, with Nigeria, Indonesia. These are vibrant new economies. And you come back and you say, hey, guys, what are you doing for Nigeria? And you get a blank look from most vendors. They have no interest. They're like, we can't make money there, or we don't understand how to get there. It just seems like we're just not curious about these markets.
Well, I think there's a couple of practical issues. One is, if you look at any software market, right, it tends to, you've got big markets in North America, Western Europe, and then it starts falling away. China's a big market. China is problematic for a lot of reasons.
Yep.
India is, everyone I've talked to, when questions of market, India is always on everyone's mind, right? It's become very visible for a couple of reasons. One, it's a fast-growing economy, huge population, fast-growing economy, and given the fact that every software company I know has a big presence there, they understand more about it than they do most countries, that they, based on the size, and it's growing so fast. The other thing that people are always balancing is, you may not have justification for Nigeria as a standalone market. The question is, for the multinational companies you work with, what's their relative importance, and how much do you want to invest to make sure that they have the ability to operate in all the countries that are critical to them? So you're always kind of balancing those two things: what is the sort of organic market, and then what's the support market you have from a multinational perspective. And honestly, that's been the discussion we've been having on localization for 30 years. I always tell people that one of my first jobs I had at Oracle was, aside from Y2K stuff, was the single currency when the European Union was adopting the single currency, and we were trying to figure out. I mean, people didn't. They said they were going to go to a common currency. No one really knew how you were going to do that. How is the accounting going to work? How does the transition period? How long are you going to hold your historical currencies and the new euro sort of on the books? And I remember figuring out, it was probably where I picked up a lot of miles on United, flying over to Europe quite a bit to sort of pick up the knowledge. But to me, that was a great way, at least for myself, to really start understanding this idea of how the world operated and what it's like to try to support software over many different countries and support it while they're changing on a continual basis.
And it's not just the accounting, right? It's languages, it's currency, it's a multi-dimensional
language, currency, numeric, the way formats of
left to right.
You have bidirectional character sets. You've got in different accounting rules that change all the time. And Lord help you, you're building a payroll system supporting payroll. You just have annual updates. You probably got quarterly updates you're doing for all of your systems, which is in some ways easier today with cloud, where you have generally one version of software you're supporting. In the days when we were running on-premise systems and we were supporting half a dozen versions of software, you were doing patches on all those versions for all the customers are running all those different versions. I mean, honestly, cloud has made the life a lot easier for developers, assuming you've managed to make the move to it.
So let's go back to your first principles, your Accenture experience. They continue to grow, but they don't change much. It's still selling school buses, right? Is it ever likely? How do we convince them there is a different business model? I mean, you would think by now they would be we could turn into IP a lot of the repetitive tasks and charge clients for some of that. they just seem to be comfortable just delivering a lot of bodies.
I think you answered your question the way you asked the question at the beginning. Is they continue to do well and grow. And the strategy for that growth is when they find, another, services firm that's doing well, they buy them, and sort of they become part of the Accenture. I don't know, sort of the body count based consulting, where it's sort of X people times Y hours is sort of what drives their model. And I think there's been some innovation. I think, they've invested in, tech centers, that they invested in different types of expertise they provide. So I think there's been some evolution, but the core business model hasn't really changed. And I don't think it will until someone new comes on the scene and shows a new model that customers respond to and that grow. It's, an example in our industry, in the software industry, was, when we bought Siebel, I was surprised to find, and Salesforce existed at the time. It was still small. It was still focused mostly on SMBs, but it was starting to get some traction in the market. And we bought Siebel, and Siebel had built a Salesforce competitor. It was basically a multi-tenant hosted solution. It was built by a different team up in Canada. And when I looked at it, it was pretty good, but they didn't sell it. And the problem they had was they were so successful selling their core
Yep.
product,
Yep.
that it was very difficult for them to get their own salespeople interested in selling the new product. So
The old
it's
like
difficult.
Christensen's, the incumbent business kills the white corpuscles.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I mentioned Concur earlier. Concur is one of the few companies I know that had a good on-premise system, and at some point the Singh brothers said, "This isn't the future. We're gonna." And you remember their stock price took a hit, like a couple of years. They went way down, but they came back up, and they made an incredibly courageous decision to shift to the cloud. So it is difficult to disrupt your own business, and I think in the case of systems integrators, I think it'll be the same thing, right? When someone new comes on and says, we're gonna, it's gonna be tied more to something that's more value based, something that's more objective outcome, driven, as opposed to, hours based. They're gonna really adopt a new approach and think more about lifetime value of a customer. Until someone else does that and gets to scale, it'll be difficult for them to make that shift.
In fairness, Accenture has moved into digital agencies, right? Which is a different business model. And vendors like SAP with Rise are trying to force them to move to a much more outcome-based, value-based proposition. So it is happening. It just seems like the core model is still school bus after school bus.
Yeah, and my daughter works for a really nice consulting firm that focus a lot on design work. And it's a great firm. They're very successful. Customers like them, but they follow the same basic model. Because when she was considering going there, she was calling me and we were talking about it. That she's telling me how it works and how she gets put on projects. And I said, "Wow, this is you're doing the same thing I did at the start of my career." So it's it's kind of interesting. But yeah, the model basically hasn't changed.
What else, John? You have such a wide lens. What else excites you?
Well, I still, AI is the thing I'm really spending a lot of time on right now. And I think it is like we're really, at the very beginning of AI. I think AI went through a bit of a hype early. Everybody bought a bunch of little AI companies to try to figure it out. They did a lot of incrementalism in building out, features on their applications using AI, next best action, in sort of a Salesforce automation kind of an app.
Right.
But nobody really said, let's step back and look at the bigger picture. Let's think about a world in which the data all exists. Let's stop thinking about our application's data as the boundary of what we should be looking at for building an application. There's so much data out there in the, beyond the enterprise application that needs to be considered now when we think about building business applications. Nobody's really thinking about that. I had a friend and colleague who went off to do the next generation SFA system, all AI based, absolutely brilliant, just couldn't get any traction with it. it was all based on, largely on Salesforce data, right? Just connect us. It wasn't gonna get rid of Salesforce, but think of it as an application that would sort of run alongside it. But just probably a little too early. And so I think, there's still that next generation set of applications, use cases where people look at it and say, this is the only way to do this, is really thinking about data as the starting point and a clear understanding of business objectives and building use cases around that and building applications that people look at and say, I'm not going to turn anything off. I'm just going to start using this in addition to it. And then over time, that more and more sort of consumes their time on the desktop. And the other application, less and less, is really what's relevant to me. I mean, in a way, that's kind of what Salesforce did. People were running Siebel already, but individual reps would go out and swipe their credit card and get their, SFA cloud-based crazy application from Salesforce, but it was their own personal contact system, their own personal lead management system, their own personal opportunity management system, and that's how it started. I think the same will be true for AI. It may be more of an enterprise application, but will be something incremental that they don't have today, but that will, over time, will start consuming the other applications that they're using today.
Well, you sound as excited about the industry as you were when you worked for Ken Ross. So, John, always always.
Yeah, no. Ken was, I should have mentioned Ken at the beginning. He was one of these guys who really had this idea about, he believed in the DeckVax platform. He believed in, you can build applications in a very different way that are much more user-centric. That was another good lesson as well early on. But I'm excited because I think in the end we've always been in this industry, we've always been trying to better approximate the businesses that we're supporting and how do we take information in a way that makes them more successful. Like, the job really hasn't changed in a lot of ways. It's continued to adapt and evolve, but ultimately what we're really trying to do is help businesses be more successful.
John, thank you so much. Always a pleasure. Look forward to seeing you. I'm coming to your part of the world a couple of times in September, so it'd be nice to sit down.
Well, look forward to seeing you as well.
Thank you.